Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hi, guys. Let's learn. Original link to the video, top the description. Reef Rebels, that a preemptive sub, preemptive like. What did the British ever do for us? Scientifically, nothing. Zero. No, a lot, probably. Let's go. My name's Connor if you're new. Hope everyone's doing well. Let's learn. Reef Rebels.
What did the British, ever do for us scientifically?
Apart from the sanitation, the medicine,
Life
education,
of Brian.
wine, public order, irrigation, roads, a fresh water system and public health, what have the Romans ever done for us?
Nowadays, our education system regards the British as brutal colonists who enslaved populations, subjugated the world. Out of roughly 200 countries in the world today, the Brits colonised, settled or invaded about 90% of them, which I think is fairly impressive, or at least I think the Romans would think it was impressive. But would we have been better off without those bastard Brits?
I think, you know, the more powerful civilizations in a very recent past, by very recent, I mean the past like 200 years, have been given a lot more, have been judged, I think, by a different standard than prior powers. I think that we just live in a bad faith environment when it comes to any sort of educational discussion or political discussion. No, I feel like there are so many, like, people are waiting on each other to say something wrong so they can be like, ha, rather than just wanting to have a good faith argument on any subject. And I said this in another video. Do you know what I mean? I can't phrase this like I want to. I think we live in a bad faith educational environment when discussing this stuff. That's what I'll say. I think it's fashionable to kind of hate on countries and show that you hate this aspect of a country, and that's what people care about. They don't care about the actual impacts or anything good that came out of something. They just care about the bad things, and I think that's unfortunate because I like to just have good faith conversations on topics
now,
like this.
As it happens, they may have some redeeming features if you look at their scientific contribution at least. Now, this is a slightly different video to normal, and I'm going to talk about the British scientific and technological achievements and inventions, even though I could mention trivial things like the British invention of some of the best countries in the world, like Australia, Canada, Singapore, New Zealand, America. Well, maybe not invented, but they were certainly highly influenced. Or even the only decent country in the Middle East, which is Israel, courtesy of Mr. Balfour.
Hot take.
And many other countries that have a great deal to be proud of, such as Malaya, South Africa, Fiji, Kenya, Botswana, Sri Lanka, India, all wonderful British creations. But we're a science channel, and
I understand, by the way, that, of course, subjects like the Israel-Palestine war or the Ukraine-Russia war, I'm not stupid. I understand that more contemporary historical things or even ongoing things are going to be more emotionally charged than other topics that you might go further in the past, right? It's a lot easier to talk about the Roman Empire without having to step on eggshells and just talk about it scientifically or in an educational manner. And so I get that stuff that is more contemporary, but I don't want to do that, though. I want to learn about these things like I would any other conflict without being accused of trying to prop up one side or the other, sort of. You know what I mean? Just I hate it. I don't like it. I like being able to talk about things without people like waiting on bated breath to like catch you on anything
we're
wrong.
Going to look at science. Now, the list is long of scientific achievements, and I'm only going to look at the really big ones and some of the more important ones. Let's start. let's start with transport and engines. So the British invented the railways, steel tracks, railway locomotives.
Steam engine.
In fact, wherever the British went, railways followed. So they put in railways in Germany, India, South America, and of course everybody copied that. Then we have the modern bicycle, initially called the Rover safety bicycle, apparently. Chain drive, caster steering, and relatively small wheels, invented by the Rover company. In fact, in Poland, the word for bicycle is Rover. And yes, it's the same company that makes Land Rovers. Now, the British obviously invented the first engines, which was the steam engine, and that broke us free from back-breaking animal and human-powered devices. Now, while the British were inventing the steam engine, they, of course, had to invent the piston, and more importantly, the piston ring that seals the piston, a truly remarkable technological invention.
I think the revolutionary ideas from the British and the Industrial Revolution and revolutionary inventions like these are so prolific in our society around the world that we take it for granted so much and forget that these were British inventions. Like that is the most mind-blowing thing, is that these inventions are so crucial, and the inventions that came out of these inventions are so crucial for everyday life that it's taken for granted and forgotten about. That's how unbelievably influential these things were.
Which is even now being developed further. And the piston ring is the basis for petrol engines and diesel engines. In fact, virtually every engine. So no Brits, no engines. Next, they invented the first engine-powered ships, obviously steam-powered. Ships' propellers, steel ships, the steam turbine, initially for powering ships, but now it powers the generators in every coal electricity generating plant and every nuclear generating plant. So that's about 50% of all the electricity that's generated today, all courtesy of Mr. Parsons.
Thanks,
then we have
Mr.
the
Parsons.
jet engine. Yes, the Germans independently invented it in the Second World War. The turboprop engine, invented by the Brits, the first turboprop aircraft. So if you don't fly in an airplane powered by a jet engine, which was largely due to the Brits, it's a turboprop airplane which was invented by the Brits. And of course the turboprop is the basis of the gas turbine, which is used to generate another 20% of the world's electricity. We also have the modern car layout, front drive, transverse engine, independent suspension, CV joints on the front wheels. Before that, companies tried all sorts of arrangements. So, for example, the Germans famously had the engine and everything at the back, but since 1959, most cars use the mini minor equivalent.
It provides a bit of protection in the case of a head-on crash, right? And I feel like the giant bulk of the weight of the vehicle you're on, having that in the back, if it's not secured in a high enough or fast enough crash, could potentially, I feel like, launch forward and crush you or something. But there is some sort of safety benefit of having it in the front, right?
Ever been on a vehicle that uses steel wheels? Pretty uncomfortable. But don't worry, the Brits invented the pneumatic tyre.
When was the first use of rubber? Because rubber, the main material from rubber comes from trees, right? I'm curious about that. When was rubber first used?
They have invented pretty much everything that runs on the road. They didn't invent the road. That's just about it. Well, actually, they did. Tarmac roads, or tarmacadam, was invented by a Scot and a Welshman. Then we have steel bridges. And here's a very interesting one, the modern traffic roundabout in the 1960s. Now, you might think that roundabouts have been around since way before the 1960s, but the Brits had the inspired idea of changing the rules for the roundabout. In other words, yield to enter, which massively increases the efficiency of the
yield sign,
roundabout.
My favorite traffic sign.
And we have the cat's eye reflector. Caterpillar tracks,
what
which
was that?
the Brits invented.
The reflective road stud. So is this like a speed bump?
cat's eye reflector, caterpillar tracks, which
Oh, wait. Oh.
then we have the
Wait, this is just for the middle of the road so you can see the middle of the road at night, right? Is that it?
cat's eye reflector. Caterpillar tracks, which the Brits invented just before they invented the tank.
Mark
So
1.
there's much more we could talk about in terms of transport technology, but we must move on to other industrial and technological stuff. Now, of course, Britain famously started the Industrial Revolution in the 18th and 19th century, and it's debated why it started in the United Kingdom, but clearly there was something special going on that made that spark. And of course, it started in the textile and agricultural industry. In the textiles, they invented the flying shuttle, powered looms, the spinning mill for making threads. In fact, if you didn't have the Brits, you don't have the very fine modern clothings which we have now, which is
There are some textile mills, they're now museums in western Rhode Island, where I am, and they're pretty cool. I think from the late 1700s.
also incredibly cheap compared with what it used to be. In the agricultural industries, there are all sorts of mechanical devices like the mechanical seed drill, the haymaking threshing machine, but also
I love that, like, once you master, the gears and everything, and making the gears, and obviously any sort of steam engine or whatever, that just opens up so many possibilities for an enormous amount of inventions to be born out of the steam engine. Or how far that, I mean, the concept of gears has been around for a long time, right? Because I think you would use gears if you were like milling, like crushing the wheat stuff to make flour. So maybe the concept of gears was way before the Industrial Revolution. Probably was. But once you get the ability to power it, I mean, that opens up so many possibilities.
Devices like the mechanical seed drill, the
like
haymaking threshing
invention.
machine, but also really important things like phosphate fertilizer production, selective breeding. But that's just the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. If you're going to have an Industrial Revolution, you need a big build buildings. And so the British gave us Portland cement, a revolutionary type of cement. Where would we be without it? Then we have things like steel boring machines, which led to the modern lathe, which is ubiquitous in metal cutting. Hyper-accurate machines for measuring things, the micrometer, for instance. You cannot have modern engineering unless you have hyperfine methods for measuring things. We have stainless steel, the production of polyethylene, very famous plastic used in just about everything. The steel hammer for forging steel and making it much stronger. The Bessemer steel process, the first mass production of steel effectively, and then the mass production of glass using the now ubiquitous virtually tin flotation method. All right, let's go a little bit electrical. So the first long distance communication cables were invented by the Brits, the coaxial cable. This was used for underwater cables to link the UK to America and other places. The first intercontinental communication.
I think it's so important to it's very dangerous to not teach stuff like this, because I think this stuff gets taken for granted, and we get so far removed to the manufacturing process for everything around today that I think people just assume it's there no matter what, and the society that is built around us by generations is so incredible and strange in terms of human history. I think we constantly need to look around and just be amazed by some of this stuff and thankful. And
the birth of the internet, in a sense, it was the first time that we could communicate all around the world. The telephone, Alexander Graham Bell was a Scotsman. The television, liquid crystal, cavity magnetron. You've never heard of the cavity? It's in your microwave, but probably more importantly, the first radars, to a large extent, used the cavity magnetron.
Some guy walked in front of it and realized his chocolate bar melted or something. Is that a myth, or is that actually how it was discovered that a use for it could be
which is a
eating
revolution.
food?
Then if we go a little bit medical, we've got CAT scanners,
MRI?
ultrasound scanners, the first town to have chlorinated water. How about the first electronic programmable computer to crack German codes in the Second World War? Accurate navigation using highly accurate clocks, the chronometers, and the first workable atomic clock. Then we have the World Wide Web, a gas stove, tin cans, and a really big one. I know you've been wondering where I get to this one. An alarm clock that makes tea. Again, I could have added many, many more things, but let's go on to fundamental science, the stuff that all other science and technology actually depends upon.
And I think what this should teach us is that, you know, is there anything special about English people? I don't know. You guys are awesome. But just, I think it shows you that having a stable enough society, government, and different policies for and having holding education high, it should show you that the format for the British way of life clearly enabled this stuff to happen, right? And so I think that should be a main point, that, you know, all this stuff can only happen if smart, capable men are born, but born in a society that can harness that smart person or capable person into being able to create things like this. So even more than the brilliant minds that did this stuff, even more so than that, I respect the society that was able to harness this, was able to cultivate this. So, you know.
But before we do that,
I think that should be the main message.
Other science and technology actually depends upon. But before we do that, maybe just like and subscribe.
I did.
How about the discovery of the proton, neutron, and electron? The three building blocks of, well, frankly, just about everything. All discovered by Brits.
About Newton.
And the Brits also discovered the opposite of matter, which is antimatter, by Paul Dirac. And more recently, the last particle in the standard physics model of just about everything, the Higgs boson, which was proposed by Peter Biggs. Now let's go a little bit bigger, but not a great deal bigger. The atom, the model of the atom with a hard nucleus with the electrons flying around, was essentially discovered by the British. And I'm being a little bit loose there because there is a famous New Zealander involved with this, but frankly in those days Kiwis were basically Brits. What about biology? Well, in my view, the two biggest advances in biology were both discovered by Brits. The first one,
just want to say again, because I think it's a good point I'm trying to make here, is that it is the, again, I think brilliant people are born in every generation, right? I don't think it was the people, I don't think the people that created these things were necessarily, you know what I'm trying to say, that we weren't just lucky in this time period to get a bunch of smart people, right? In order to continue the sort of innovations, inventions that raise our quality of life, allow us to explore outside and you know, beyond in the universe and whatnot, and just raise quality of life, depends on a society that is free, that is economically stable, and just has an environment that produces this kind of stuff. That stuff can be lost. I think that kind of society seems to be pretty rare in human history, or more rare than I would like. And again, that is my main kind of thing I'm trying to say here.
Is Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. And then you have the discovery of the structure of DNA at Cambridge University. Fundamental molecular biology, which the whole DNA revolution has been based on. And yes, I know Watson was an American and Wilkins was a Kiwi. Anyway, of course, the discovery of the structure meant this explosion in growth of the whole DNA industry, effectively, such as DNA fingerprinting, now invented by the Brits. Now let's go back to more basic, very fundamental, and possibly more important medicine. We have antiseptics, antibiotics, vaccines, all three invented by Brits. But let's go back to physics now. So we have Newton's laws of motion, Newton's laws of gravity. Where would we be without Sir Isaac Newton? We essentially couldn't predict anything.
We'd be floating into the air because he invented gravity. That was my attempt at a joke.
Newton. We essentially couldn't predict anything. Back on to the physics, the laws of optics and the way that radio waves travel. Light, the laws of electromagnetic propagation in signals and wires. Scotsman James Clerk Maxwell's. You don't have any mobile phones or computers or communication cables without Maxwell. And then we have electromagnetic induction from Michael Faraday's. If you don't understand magnetic induction, there are no electric motors, there's no electric generators. Basically, the whole backbone of the electricity system, you owe it to the Brits. Or in mathematics, and there are a lot here, so I'm going to pick the really big one, which is the invention of calculus. Yes, there was another guy called Leibniz who also invented it at the same time, but essentially Newtonian calculus is at the basis of a huge amount of advanced science of engineering. It's as fundamental as algebra and arithmetic. Now, this list is not complete. There are literally a zillion other things that the Brits have contributed to.
Main moral of the story here, I think, is we need to look at society when a lot of, what was it about the society during the Enlightenment and when a lot of advances were made? And what was it about, what was society like during that? And what was society like during the more dark times of human history? And by dark, I mean less technological advancements, more, I'd imagine, more kind of totalitarian stuff. But I think that's the main thing is, of course, the amazing people who invented and discovered the things that we're talking about here, that he's talking about. But what is it about the societies that happen to cultivate this sort of invention? What is it about the societies that don't happen to cultivate invention? We need to look at those. What makes it happen? And I think that is a very important thing to know.
Actually, there is just one more. The Flushing Loo. Now,
John Harrington?
Much of what those British scientists did was based on other scientists from lots of other countries, and the Brits were just part of this magnificent thing which we call Western civilization. Of course, there were French and there were Germans, and the scientific development and advancement then spread to the United States and now to the Far East. But the contribution of the Brits were utterly fundamental on so many levels. Now, without those advancements, our lives would be short, harsh, and frankly, just bloody horrible. The world's population would still be about 1 billion, which is what it was in about 1800, rather than the roughly 8 billion that it is today without that wonderful science and technology. Now, if you add up all the bad things that the Brits may have done, the Amritsar massacre, the Bengal famine, and all the other bad things that happened, albeit only occasionally considering the attitudes of the times. But even if you add all those up, it's not a drop in the bucket compared with what has been achieved and the lives that have saved. How many lives, how many babies, children, were saved by antibiotics and antiseptics, and clean water, or the uses of electricity, communications and transport? Famines are effectively a thing of the past because, well, for one reason, we can ship food around from one place to another very, very easily. Now, look, it turns out that I was born in England, and even though I'm an Aussie, so I am biased. But I don't think it makes sense to be proud of what your ancestors did or were unless there's some evidence that you carry on those ideas, values and traditions. But even if you don't measure up to those ancestors or other people's ancestors, it's just bad form not to appreciate what those people did for us. The contribution of the Brits was truly incredible, and we should all be grateful that they came along and did more than virtually any other group to pull humanity out of the appalling, difficult lives that existed before the 1800s. So, do you think the ledger for those bastard Brits, is it positive or negative?
Well, undoubtedly positive. But I don't think that you need to look at it like a ledger, okay? If I want to talk about, say, you know, the amazing inventions of, say, the British Empire, right? And then, you know, some of the time I want to talk about, you know, the horrible things of the British Empire. No problem with that, you know? My problem and fear sometimes, or my problem is that when I want to talk about the inventions of, say, the British Empire, that someone would be like, but look at what they did here. Why are you trying to discount the invention I'm talking about by something that they did that is, why do we have to weigh those, you know? Of course, if the British Empire was here today and doing a lot of stuff that isn't great, that'd be a different story. But for something in the past that has been so fruitful for the world, one of the scariest things, or some of the scariest people to me, are the people who have any chance of getting into power, either now or in the future, that do not realize, you know, the phrase, like, you stand on the shoulders of giants. Let me phrase it this way. It is terrifying to me when people think that the bad things about the world we live in are due to, you know, what they would consider imperial powers or capitalism. And the reason that terrifies me is because it gives me the feeling that you don't realize that a lot of the stuff you're doing and that helps your life is because of the systems that you call evil or suppressing. Do you know what I mean? That's what I mean. Of course, you can criticize systems, whether, you know, governments or way of life or economic systems, of course. But it's when you act as if everything is standard and the only thing that these systems bring are negative consequences. Because if you believe that way, then I think that if you were ever to get into power, you would want to get rid of that stuff. And then, what do you know? We lose a lot of that. We lose a lot of the quality of life things we have today. And then it's like, oh, whoops, I didn't know that. And that's terrifying to me. All right? So, yeah. Love y'all. Hope you guys are all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below, any answers to any questions I had. And hopefully I'll see you next video. Bye, guys.